he made a king, and in doing so, he lit a war that would burn half the realm. Then, with that war at its height, the greatest knight of his age rode out onto an open field he could have left, and let it kill him. No dragons above him, no escape behind him. Offered his life if he would only yield, he refused, and called instead for single combat, and died beneath a storm of arrows. So tell me, did Sir Criston Cole die a fool, a hero, or a man who had finally found the one thing he was looking for? Welcome to Westeros Within, where we journey into forgotten ages, hidden legends, and ancient mysteries. This is Mysteries of the Realm. Episode 21. The Kingmaker. Did the man who lit the war want to die? Let us be sure of the man we are burying. Criston Cole was not born to greatness. He was the son of a steward to a Dornish marcher lord, lowborn, or near enough, who rose on nothing but the strength of his arm. At a tourney in his youth, a young princess named Rhaenyra Targaryen chose him as her champion and gave him her favor. He climbed into the white cloak of the Kingsguard, and in time became its Lord Commander. And then, somewhere in those years, whatever lay between Criston and the princess curdled into something poisonous. What happened? No one can say for certain. The Fool Mushroom tells a tale of a forbidden night and a love refused. The pious Septon Eustace tells a different one entirely, of temptation and rejection. The two accounts cannot both be true, and both men had reasons to lie. All we know is that the knight who had once won the princess's favor became, in the end, the architect of her ruin. For when the old King Viserys died, it was Criston Cole, more than any other man at court, who put the crown on the head of her half-brother Aegon instead. He set the Conqueror's own circlet upon Aegon's brow. The histories gave him a name for it, the Kingmaker. He was made Hand of the King. He led the Green Armies, and early in the war, he engineered his masterstroke, a trap at a place called Rook's Rest, baiting one of the Queen's dragons into the open to be killed. It worked. A dragon died, and a rival fell. But in that same fire, his own king, Aegon, was burned and broken, maimed almost to death by the chaos Criston himself had set in motion. His greatest victory crippled the very king he had crowned. And so the war passed into a harder phase, and Criston marched a host into the riverlands, a column of proud knights, but without a single dragon in the sky above them. What happened next is not in dispute. The river lords would not meet him in open battle. They harried him, ambushed him, bled his column mile by mile as it marched through hostile country. And at last, on the ground south of the God's Eye, they caught him, a great host of the Trident's lords, waiting, while his own men were footsore and far from home. They offered him terms. Lay down your arms and live. He refused. He called for single combat instead, against 3 enemy commanders at once, and they answered him not with swords, but with a rain of arrows. The slaughter that followed was so one-sided that a knight who saw it called it butchery, not battle, and the Fool Mushroom gave it the name it keeps to this day: the Butcher's Ball. So here is the mystery. Criston Cole was, by every account, one of the most capable soldiers of his age, a brilliant tactician, a disciplined commander. So why did that man march into a trap he should have seen? And then, cornered and offered his life, choose to die? There are 4 ways to read it. Let us weigh them. The first is the simplest. It was a blunder, and the evidence for it is written into the ground itself. Criston led a host with no dragons through country that belonged to his enemies. The river lords chose not to fight him fairly. They starved him, picked at him, and drew him onto terrain of their choosing, where their gathered strength could fall on his exhausted column all at once. Strip away the legend, and what you have is a competent general outmaneuvered by a patient enemy and caught in a bad position. Men far less proud than Criston Cole have lost battles exactly this way. But the blunder theory has a problem, and the problem is Criston himself. This was not some green boy. This was the man who had sprung the perfect trap at Rook's Rest, who understood better than almost anyone how a careful commander lures a careless one to his death. That a tactician of that caliber would blindly march into the very kind of trap he himself had mastered. It is possible, but it sits uneasily. So consider the second reading. Honor. This is the one that best explains not the defeat, but the choice at the end. Criston Cole was Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, a white knight, sworn to a code older than the war he was fighting. A man like that does not surrender his king's army to save his own skin. When he was offered his life on the condition that his men lay down their arms, he refused and called for single combat. That is not the act of a man who has lost his nerve. It is the oldest script in chivalry. Death before dishonor. The lone knight challenging the host. By the code he had lived his whole life, Criston did the only thing he could. And yet, notice that honor explains the same actions as the blunder, only nobler. It tells us he would not run. It does not tell us why he was there to begin with, why a careful man let himself be caught at all. Honor is how he died. It is not by itself why. Which brings us to the third reading, the one this whole story seems to lean toward, a death wish. Think about what this man was carrying. He had crowned a king who many said had no right to the throne. He had, by the reckoning of the chroniclers, set brother against sister and lit a war that was now consuming the realm. And his single greatest stroke of the entire war, Rook's Rest, had ended with his own king burned and broken by his own design. Every triumph had turned to ash in his hands. The Kingmaker had made nothing but ruin. A man carrying that weight, who then rides out onto an open field with no dragons and no line of retreat, and who, when handed his life, throws it away in a hopeless challenge. That man, some say, was not trying to win. He was trying to end. The marching into the trap and the refusal to leave it become not two mysteries, but one answer. He went looking for the arrows. It is the most powerful version of the story. And we have to be honest about why. Because it is the version that gives all that carnage a meaning. It turns a defeat into a confession. But that is exactly the danger. Look hard at the chronicle, and you will find every ingredient of the death wish. The guilt, the maimed king, the refusal to flee, and not one word that names it. The book hands us the pieces and lets us assemble the man we want to see. The death wish is our story. It may not be his. And so we come to the fourth reading, the one that questions the whole frame, the Kingmaker himself. We call Criston Cole, the man who started the dance. But did he? The crowning of Aegon was not one man's doing. It was a whole faction. A queen, a hand, a council, a court full of green-cloaked ambition that chose to put Aegon on the throne. Yet the histories reach past all those high-born schemers and lay the war at the feet of one low-born Dornish knight. It is worth asking why. A base-born man who climbed too high, who presumed to make kings, he is the easiest of all to blame and the safest. If Criston was the Kingmaker, then the great lords who cheered him on were merely swept along. The legend that condemns him also conveniently excuses everyone above him. So what do I believe? I believe the battle was a blunder, dressed at its end, in honor. He was outmaneuvered by patient men who would not give him the fight he wanted. And when the trap closed, the code he had served all his life left him only one door, and he walked through it with his head high. But the death wish, I cannot put it down, and I cannot prove it. I think a part of Sir Criston Cole was tired. I think the man who had made a king and watched that king burn, who had lit a war he could no longer control, did not fight as hard to live as a man with something left to live for. I do not think he rode out that day intending to die. I think he rode out no longer very afraid of it. And the Kingmaker name? I think that is the realm's way of needing one man to blame, so it would not have to blame itself. He crowned Aegon. He did not crown him alone. The truth is, the only men who could tell us what was in his heart that day were a mocking fool and a moralizing septon who could not agree on anything about him, including whether the princess who started his fall ever loved him at all. Criston Cole rode into the arrows and took the answer with him. So tell me this, did Sir Criston Cole die a soldier outmaneuvered, a knight keeping his vow, or a broken man who wanted the war to end with him? Write it in the comments. I read every theory. And if you want to be here when we unravel the next mystery, subscribe to Westeros Within and join me for the next chapter.